There are so many chords you gotta remember. There's literally thousands of chords you gotta remember and that you gotta place on your fretboard. But I'm gonna challenge you and tell you there's only 5 chords. But here's the twist. Instead of the word chord, we're gonna use the word shape. So let me give you an example. So here you have your common E chord shape, open chord shape, right? These are the 3 strings you're fretting, and these are the 3 strings that are open. You're playing all of those notes. But isn't an F chord the same thing? Look at these 2 chords. They share exactly the same structure. They are exactly the same thing. So why is that? Let's take a look at this note. I'm going to color it red. This is the note that names the chord. That's an E note. This is what we call the root note. I like to call it the red note because I might not know what a root note is. So I'm just going to call it a red note. Now what happens to that red note, just that red note, if I move it 1 fret higher? It becomes another note, correct? It actually became an F note. E, F, following the alphabet. So if one note became another note, one chord must become another chord. Exactly. Let's take a look at your A chord shape. That's your open A chord shape. Now this note on the 5th string is an A note, which names the chord, the red note. Same thing. If you move that red note higher up the fretboard, it's going to become another note. In this case, a B note. But what happens if I move all the notes that created A at the same time? One note became another note. One chord becomes another chord. Exactly. But it actually becomes all the other chords if we follow the alphabet. The musical alphabet is exactly the same as the normal alphabet. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So we started with A. The next chord we're going to find, if we move that A chord shape, remember, we're not moving a chord anymore, we're moving a shape, is going to be B. What's the next chord? If we move that chord shape again, what chord are we going to find? C, exactly. And what's the next chord going to be? D, exactly. And so on. E, F, and G. All chords with one shape. So what are those 5 chord shapes I told you about? They are your open chords. A, C, D, E, G. Any one of these chord shapes can be moved across the fretboard to create any major chord. And the thickest string you play defines the name of the chord. So with A, your 5th string is the thickest string. We're going to color that red. For C, your 5th string is also the thickest string. We're going to color that red too. See, this is an A note, B note, C chord. For D, it's the 4th string. For E, it's the 6th string. And for G, it's also the 6th string. So you can see that red note calls out the name of the chord. E note, E chord. G note, G chord. So imagine I find whatever note, this note over here. Now I can play that chord very easily if I just look at my shapes and find out which shape has a note that defines the name of the chord on the 5th string. So I've got an A shape, for example, right? So I'm just going to copy this over here. Boom, if I fret this, I'm playing that chord. So what chord is it? Let's start here. A, B, C, D, E. That's an E chord using an A shape. See how it's an A shape? But I moved it up the fretboard to play an E chord. So you might be thinking, wait a minute, there's 5 notes I have to play. How am I going to fret that? Well, here's where bar chords come in. These 2 notes over here are the ones you bar. But is there another way to play an E chord right in this position? Let's look at that red dot again. We know this is an E note. A, B, C, D, E. Is there another chord shape of these 5 chord shapes that has that ret note on the 5th string? Check it out, this one right here. So I'm just going to copy this over here, and I'll have another way to play an E chord. Boom, I'm playing an E chord, but using a C shape. And these 2 notes are the ones I bar. So if you still don't believe me, let's move the C shape to the original position and start moving it across the fretboard, see if it finds E. I'm going to move it over here. That's a C chord, right? Well, we follow the alphabet, A, B, C, D, E. This is how the fretboard works. Now let's assume you find a note on the 6th string. For example, this one over here. That's a G note. E, F, G, following the alphabet. So what chord shapes from these 5 shapes have that note on the 6th string? This shape and this shape. You probably already know how to play a G shape over here, open position. So let's use this one. Boom, I just translated this over here, and this over here is your bar. But what happens if you want to play an E7, for example? Well, the only difference from E to E7 is this note moves 2 fret down, and that right there is an E7. So now I can translate this over here, and that's going to be my E7, right? But what if I start moving that E7 up the fretboard? If I move it 1 fret higher, it's going to become an F7. Remember, this is your bar right here, right? If I move it 2 frets higher from there, G7. 2 frets higher from there, A7. I'm just copying this shape from the E7. I didn't put the 7 in there. All across the fretboard to create all 7 chords. So you see there's only 5 chord shapes that you can modify by moving a couple notes. For example, that would be an A minor, and then move across the fretboard to create all chords. And if you look closely, look at those letters: C, A, G, E, D. Caged. Hey, if you want to know everything about chords, but you're frustrated because all those YouTube tutorials and all those courses use heavy theory jargon that make you feel you need like a music master's degree of some sort, right? I've got something for you. This little book is written in plain language. Let me show you inside. So here you have it, the Ultimate Guitarist Chord Book. Everything you want to learn about chords is inside this book with no complicated theory jargon. We covered topics such as chord shapes, right? How to switch through chord shapes. See all those colors I told you about? We covered triads. We cover cage system. We covered bar chords. We cover chord progressions by genres, the circle of fifths. You also have a chord library here to know how to fret your chords. Go and check it out. I'm going to leave the link down there. This is the book you want if you want to learn everything about chords.